Metal snow over Hamburg. At 0:57 in the early hours of July 25, 1943, somewhere above Hamburg, a British bomber crewman leaned toward the flare chute of a heavy aircraft and pushed a bundle of thin metal strips into the night. The aircraft around him shuddered in the cold air. For engines beat steadily through the darkness, each vibration passing through the ribs of the machine and into the bodies of the men inside it. The fuselage smelled of oil, canvas, sweat, oxygen rubber, and the dry metallic scent of fear that bomber crews rarely named out loud. Somewhere below, Germany was waiting. The men knew what waited. Searchlights, flak, night fighters, radar. For years, the night sky over occupied Europe had not been empty darkness. It had been measured, watched, divided, and defended. German radar stations looked outward from the coast and deep inside the Reich. Operators sat before their screens, reading green traces and glowing echoes. Controllers spoke into headsets. Fighter crews waited beside aircraft that would soon climb into blackness. The bomber crews had learned to fear what they could not see. A night fighter did not always announce itself. Sometimes there was no warning, no dramatic chase, no heroic duel, just a burst of cannon fire from beneath or behind, a wing suddenly burning, a voice on the intercom cut short, and a bomber falling away from the stream with 7 men still trapped inside. On that night over Hamburg, the RAF crews were not carrying only bombs. They carried something stranger. It was not heavy. It was not complex. It did not look like a weapon. In the hand, it could seem almost ridiculous. Strips of metal foil, cut to a precise length, packed in bundles, waiting to be scattered into the air. A cheap thing. A fragile thing. But war has a way of humiliating expensive certainty. Inside a German radar station, an operator watched his screen with the discipline of a man trained to trust instruments more than instinct. He expected movement. He expected echoes. He expected the RAF bomber stream to appear as targets that could be tracked, reported, and fed into the machinery of German air defense. Then the screen began to change. The returns multiplied. Shapes appeared where no aircraft should have been. The picture thickened. The clean separation between target and empty sky began to dissolve. What had been a radar screen became a storm. The operator might have leaned closer. He might have adjusted a control. He might have called to the man beside him. Because the machine was still working. That was the terrible part. It was not broken. It was lying. Above Hamburg, more bundles fell. They opened in the slipstream, and the strips drifted downward like metallic snow. Each tiny piece caught radar energy and threw back a false answer. To the eye, they were almost nothing. To radar, they became aircraft, formations, threats, ghosts. The Germans had believed radar could make the night visible. But what really happened was that the night learned how to deceive the machines watching it. And the weapon that did it had nearly never been used at all. The invisible wall Germany trusted. Before the strips fell over Hamburg, German confidence in radar was not foolish. It had reasons behind it. By 1943, the air war over Europe had become a contest of systems. Not simply bomber against fighter. Not simply courage against courage. Machines had entered the darkness and changed what men believed was possible. Radar could see where eyes could not. Ground controllers could direct night fighters toward bombers they had never visually spotted. Searchlights could be guided into the right patch of sky. Flak batteries could be warned before the bombers arrived. The German night defense network was a structure built from steel towers, cables, telephones, plotting rooms, aircraft, trained operators, and repeated experience. It was not perfect. No system in war is. But to the men who depended on it, it gave the night a shape. That mattered. Without radar, darkness was chaos. With radar, darkness could be organized. A bomber stream approaching Germany was not merely a mass of aircraft. To German defenders, it became a problem that could be processed. Detected by early warning radar. Tracked. Reported. Interpreted. Intercepted. Every stage took time, but every stage reduced uncertainty. For RAF crews, that German certainty felt like a tightening net. At a British airfield before a night raid, the crews might gather in a briefing room under harsh lights, staring at a map with red tape stretched toward Germany. The target name would be revealed. Hamburg, Essen, Cologne, Berlin. The room might stay quiet for a second longer than usual. Men would glance at one another without needing to say much. They had seen empty chairs at breakfast. They had watched crews fail to return. They had heard the engines of damaged aircraft stumbling back across the coast. One engine dead, then two, the runway lights waiting like a final mercy. In the air, the danger came in layers. Flak bursts opened in the dark like black flowers with orange centers. Searchlights swept upward, pale and pitiless. If they caught a bomber and held it, the aircraft seemed to hang naked above the city. Then the guns began to correct. But the most frightening threat was often the unseen one. A German night fighter could climb toward the stream under control from the ground. It could be placed close enough for the pilot to make final contact. Sometimes the bomber crew would never know it was there until shells tore into the wing root or cockpit. The Germans believed this was the future of night defense, a disciplined chain of detection and destruction. And for a time, they were right enough to be dangerous. But a chain is only as strong as the trust between its links. Radar operators had to trust their screens. Controllers had to trust the operators. Fighter pilots had to trust the voices guiding them. Commanders had to trust that the picture forming in the operations room resembled the sky outside. That was the hidden weakness. German radar did not have to be smashed. It only had to be made uncertain. And in a laboratory far from the burning cities, British scientists had already found a way to do exactly that. The idea that looked too simple. The idea did not look like something that should trouble a military empire. It was not a new bomber. It was not a secret engine. It was not a gun. It was foil, metal strips, cut to length, dropped from aircraft. The principle was simple enough that, in another setting, it might have sounded like a schoolroom demonstration. Radar sent out energy. Certain objects reflected that energy back. If enough small reflective strips were released into the air, each one could create a return. A radar screen might not see one aircraft. It might see a cloud of false echoes. The British called it window. Later generations would know the broader idea as chaff. But in 1943, window was not just a technical device. It was a decision no one wanted to own too early. The fear was obvious. If Britain used it over Germany, Germany might use it over Britain. British air defense had also depended on radar. During the Battle of Britain, radar had helped give fighter command warning, time, and structure. To blind German radar might invite the Germans to blind British radar in return. So the weapon sat in a strange prison. Not because it was useless, because it was useful. Too useful. There are weapons that frighten commanders because they may fail. Window frightened some because it might work, and because the enemy might learn from it. Somewhere in that delay, bomber crews kept flying. Men climbed into aircraft night after night while a possible answer remained withheld. That is one of the quieter cruelties of war. The distance between those who calculate risk on paper and those who carry the risk in their bodies. A senior officer could speak of timing, secrecy, retaliation, strategic consequence. A rear gunner had only the turret around him, the cold around his legs, and a sky in which death might appear without warning. The men who understood Window's potential did not need to believe it would make bombers safe. No one serious believed that. It would not stop engines from failing. It would not silence flak. It would not prevent collisions in cloud, icing, navigation errors, or the awful randomness of a night raid. But it might do one thing. It might make German radar doubt itself. In electronic warfare, doubt is not a small thing. A radar operator who hesitates loses seconds. A controller who cannot identify the real track sends a fighter too far left, too high, too late. A searchlight battery waiting for direction sweeps empty air. A night fighter pilot burns fuel chasing a ghost. Seconds become miles. Miles become survival. And yet, before Hamburg, the idea still carried the stain of absurdity. To many outside the technical world, it was difficult to believe that strips of treated paper and metal could interfere with a modern radar network. A defense system had towers, trained personnel, aircraft, weapons, doctrine. Window had bundles. But the war was moving into a new realm, whether commanders liked it or not. The battlefield was no longer only ground, sea, and air. It was also information. And on the night Hamburg was chosen, Britain finally decided to attack what Germany believed it could see. Men inside the system. The men who dropped window were not scientists in white coats. They were aircrew. Young, tired, trained, superstitious in small ways, and old in the manner of men who had seen too many friends vanish. A bomber crew was a small society sealed inside aluminum and noise. Pilot, flight engineer, navigator, bomb aimer, wireless operator, mid-upper gunner, rear gunner. Each man had a task. Each task mattered. Each depended on the others doing theirs while fear pressed in from every side. Before takeoff, the aircraft sat heavy on the runway. Ground crew moved beneath the wings with practiced urgency. Fuel lines, bomb loads, ammunition, final checks. Somewhere, a mechanic might slap the fuselage twice, not because the machine understood, but because men sometimes needed rituals more than explanations. Inside the aircraft, there was very little romance. The bomber was cramped, cold at altitude, and full of hard edges. Oxygen masks rubbed the face. Gloves made fingers clumsy. Frost could form. Static cracked through the intercom. A man might want to scratch his nose and find even that small act difficult. The crew knew Hamburg was not an ordinary target. Germany's second city was a port, an industrial center, a place tied to shipbuilding, transport, and war production. It was also full of civilians, families, workers, children, old people who had no control over the war being fought above their roofs. That knowledge did not disappear inside the aircraft. But neither did the memory of British cities bombed earlier in the war, or the belief among Allied commanders that German industry had to be broken from the air. Moral clarity was easier in speeches than it was in the belly of a bomber. On the German side, the radar operator was also a man inside a system. He was not a monster in a machine. He was trained to do a job. Watch, interpret, report. His screen was a narrow window into the sky. He trusted it because he had been taught to trust it, and because many nights had proved it useful. A trace became a target. A target became a report. A report became an interception. The system had worked often enough to become belief. That is how military systems become dangerous. Not because they are perfect, because people begin to treat them as if they are. The German night fighter pilot waiting for direction had his own fear. Flying in darkness was not effortless hunting. He could crash. He could miss. He could be misdirected. He could collide with another aircraft. He could be caught by return fire from a bomber he approached too carelessly. Everyone in the system needed the radar picture to be clear. The man at the screen, the controller at the table, the pilot in the cockpit, the gun crews below. Window did not attack any one of them directly. It attacked the trust between them. And when the first strips began to fall over Hamburg, the men inside that system had no time to debate theory. They had only the screen in front of them. And the screen was filling with ghosts. The target chosen. Hamburg was not selected by accident. It was a city of water, docks, factories, railway lines, warehouses, shipyards, and dense urban districts. It mattered to Germany's war economy. It mattered symbolically. It was close enough for large bomber forces to reach in the short summer nights. And in July 1943, it became the focus of a combined Allied air campaign that would be remembered as Operation Gomorrah. The campaign began on July 24th and included British night raids and American daylight raids. For RAF Bomber Command, the opening night carried more than the weight of another raid. It carried the first major use of window. The decision was not merely technical. It was psychological. Once window was used, the secret was gone. Germany would know. German scientists and engineers would examine what had happened. They would search for explanations. They would adapt. Perhaps they would copy it. There would be no taking it back. That is why the hours before the raid mattered. In operations rooms, men leaned over maps. Weather reports were studied. Routes were checked. Timing mattered. Bomber streams depended on concentration. Many aircraft passing through dangerous airspace in a limited window of time, overwhelming defenses by mass and timing rather than wandering alone through the night. At the airfields, crews were briefed on more than target and route. Some had to understand the handling of window, how often to release it, where, when, through which chute. A simple action, repeated under extreme pressure, could decide whether the countermeasure worked as intended. There is a certain kind of military task that looks easy only to someone not doing it. Drop one bundle every minute. Simple. Now do it in a freezing bomber over Germany, while flak is rising, while the aircraft shakes, while the intercom crackles, while the navigator calls corrections, while the pilot tries to hold course, while every man aboard knows that one mistake can draw a fighter into the dark behind them. The cheapness of window did not make it casual. It had to be done correctly. Below, Germany waited with a defense system built for a different kind of night. The operators expected targets, not illusions. Controllers expected radar stations to provide useful tracks. Fighters expected guidance. The British were about to force a question on them. What if the screen still glowed, the equipment still functioned, the operators still worked, and the information itself became poisoned? That was the gamble. The bombers took off. One by one, aircraft rolled down runways under the weight of fuel, bombs, men, and a secret measured in strips. Wheels lifted. Engines strained. The dark swallowed them. For the men inside, the war narrowed to instruments, voices, and time. For the German radar network, the night still looked manageable. It would not stay that way. The test under fire. The first moments of a raid could feel almost calm. That calm was deceptive. Inside the bomber, the noise never stopped. Engines did not roar in the theatrical sense. They filled the body. They became the air the men lived inside. The aircraft vibrated constantly, a low mechanical pressure beneath every thought. The navigator worked over charts and instruments with a concentration that allowed no room for imagination. The pilot stared into darkness. The flight engineer watched fuel and engine readings. The gunners searched empty blackness for movement that might not appear until it was already too close. Then came the coast. Then the first signs of enemy attention. Flak could begin as distant flashes, almost beautiful if a man forgot what they were. Then the bursts came nearer. Searchlights moved restlessly below, long white fingers feeling for aircraft in the dark. Radio messages broke through static. The bomber stream pressed on. At the ordered intervals, window went out. The bundles slipped from the aircraft and vanished. Behind them, they opened. The strips did not fall like stones. They drifted, scattered, spread by air, each piece small and light and engineered for deception. Radar energy reached them and came back changed into false meaning. On German screens, the effect was not poetic. It was confusion. Returns multiplied. Tracks blurred. What should have been a bomber stream became a mass of echoes. The radar operator could still see something. Too much, in fact. The problem was no longer blindness in the ordinary sense. It was a flood of vision without certainty. That was worse. A blank screen tells a man he has no information. A crowded screen tempts him to believe he does. Controllers needed decisions. Fighters needed vectors. Guns needed warning. Searchlights needed cues. The entire chain demanded that uncertainty be resolved quickly. But window made quick resolution dangerous. Was that echo a bomber? Was it a strip cloud? Was the formation there or 10 miles away? Was the target moving or only drifting? A night fighter sent toward a false return did not merely waste effort. It lost position. It lost time. It burned fuel. It left real bombers elsewhere with a few more minutes. For the RAF crew, those minutes mattered. No one aboard would have said the sky became safe. It did not. Flak still rose. Aircraft still burned. Men still died. Hamburg was still defended, and the journey home still waited like a second trial. But something had shifted. The German hunters were no longer moving through a clean system. They were moving through doubt. In the bomber, a crewman might continue feeding bundles into the chute, one by one with gloved hands. Perhaps he did not see the effect. Perhaps he had no proof that the strips were doing anything at all. His world was the metal floor beneath him, the noise, the cold, the next instruction, the discipline of repeating a small act while the aircraft flew deeper into danger. That is often how history changes in war. Not through a speech, not through a grand gesture, through a frightened man doing a small job at the correct moment. Below, the German radar picture continued to decay. The night had not become empty. It had become crowded with lies. And the men trained to defend Hamburg were forced to make decisions inside a sky they no longer understood. The hunters chased ghosts. The Germans had believed their radar network gave them a form of control. Window did not remove every weapon from their hands. It did something subtler. It made control unreliable. That distinction matters. A disabled system can be abandoned. A confused system keeps demanding faith. Operators still saw returns. Controllers still received reports. Fighters still took off. Searchlights still swept upward. Flak batteries still fired. The machinery of defense continued moving. But its rhythm was broken. A night defense system depends on timing. A fighter must be guided into position before the bomber passes. A searchlight must find the right patch of sky before the target is gone. A controller must understand the bomber stream quickly enough to matter. Even a few minutes of confusion can open a passage through which aircraft survive. Window stole minutes. It forced German radar operators to question their screens at precisely the moment they needed certainty. It forced controllers to separate reality from clutter while the raid was already unfolding. It sent some fighters toward false concentrations and left others waiting for better instructions that did not come soon enough. To the pilots in the bomber stream, the change may have been felt only indirectly. Perhaps fewer searchlights locked on. Perhaps the expected fighter attack did not come. Perhaps the silence behind them lasted longer than usual. A rear gunner might scan the dark, waiting for the shape of a night fighter to rise from below. He would not know whether Window had saved him. He would only know that, for another minute, he was still alive. That is the cruel arithmetic of air war. Survival often arrives without explanation. For the German side, the shock would have been professional before it became emotional. A screen that had once simplified the sky now complicated it. A trusted method no longer produced trusted results. Men who had been trained in procedures discovered that the enemy had attacked the assumptions behind those procedures. The radar was not cowardly. The operators were not incompetent. The system had met a new kind of weapon. One that did not destroy the eye. It filled the eye with false images. This was the battlefield reality that broke the old belief. Seeing was not the same as knowing. A machine could detect, measure, display, and still mislead the human being who depended on it. But even as Window helped the bomber stream, the cost of the raid was beginning to descend on the city below. Hamburg was not a radar diagram. It was streets, cellars, tram lines, churches, factories, apartment blocks, shelters, docks, hospitals, and people waiting under the sound of engines. The crews above were trying to survive. The civilians below were about to endure what survival meant from the other side. And the strips of foil falling through the night were only one part of a much larger fire. The mathematics of survival. The power of Window can be misunderstood if it is treated like magic. It was not magic. It did not make bombers invisible in the absolute sense. It did not stop every radar. It did not make German defenders helpless. It did not turn a night raid into a safe passage. Men still died. Aircraft still failed to return. But war is often decided in margins. A few seconds. A few degrees. A fighter sent to the wrong point. A controller forced to hesitate. A searchlight searching too far left. A bomber passing through a defended zone before the defense fully reacts. Window attacked those margins. A German night fighter did not need to patrol the whole sky if radar and ground control could narrow the hunt. That was the purpose of the system. Reduce the vastness of night into a manageable intercept. Window expanded the sky again. It returned confusion to a space Germany had tried to organize. The cost comparison was almost insulting. On one side, radar stations, trained operators, electrical equipment, communications networks, night fighter aircraft, fuel, maintenance crews, pilots, ammunition, command systems. On the other, strips, cut metal, dropped in bundles. But cheap does not mean simple, and simple does not mean weak. The strips had to be made to the right dimensions to affect the radar wavelengths they were meant to confuse. They had to be released in quantity. They had to be used at the right point in the raid. Their effectiveness depended not only on physics, but on timing, training, and the enemy's reliance on radar interpretation. What mattered was not only that window created echoes, created too many possible answers. In combat, too many answers can be as dangerous as none. The radar operator had seconds to interpret. The controller had seconds to decide. The fighter pilot had minutes of fuel and darkness. The bomber crew had no extra life to spend while the enemy sorted out uncertainty. The British had found a way to make the German system pay a tax in time. Every false return demanded attention. Every ghost track competed with a real aircraft. Every moment of hesitation widened the gap between detection and interception. For the men inside the bombers, that gap could be the distance between returning to base and becoming wreckage in a German field. But there was another side to the calculation. If window reduced bomber losses, it also made raids more effective. More aircraft reached the target. More bombs fell. The same device that helped one group survive contributed to the destruction experienced by another group below. That is where the mathematics becomes uncomfortable. A saved bomber crew might mean 7 men returning to England. It might also mean another load delivered over a burning city. In war, numbers do not stay clean for long. They acquire faces. And over Hamburg, the faces were everywhere, in the aircraft, in the radar rooms, and in the streets below. The city below. Hamburg did not experience Operation Gomorrah as an electronic warfare breakthrough. Hamburg experienced it as fire. The city beneath the bombers was made of military targets and civilian life woven together in the way modern war rarely separates cleanly. Docks supported the war. Factories supported the war. Railways supported the war. Workers lived near the things they built and moved. Families slept under roofs not far from industrial districts. Shelters filled when the sirens began. From above, a city at night can become abstract. A shape, target area, a glow beneath cloud. From below, it is entirely specific. A stairwell filling with smoke. A mother searching for a child's shoes. A man forcing open a shelter door. Heat moving through streets as if the air itself had become hostile. The bombing of Hamburg produced vast destruction, and later raids in the campaign contributed to one of the most infamous firestorms of the war. Any documentary about window has to hold that truth without looking away. The foil strips helped blind radar. They helped bomber crews survive. They also helped make the bombing campaign more effective. Those facts do not cancel each other. They sit together uneasily, as facts in war often do. For the RAF crews, there was no easy triumph in returning. A bomber landing at dawn could carry damage in its wings, blood on the floor, silence over the intercom where a voice had been. Men climbed down from aircraft changed by what they had seen and done. Some would eat breakfast because routine demanded it. Some would write letters. Some would sleep badly. Some would not speak much at all. For German radar operators, the night could leave a different wound. Not the visible wound of shrapnel, but the professional shock of watching a trusted system fail in real time. They had done what training demanded. They had watched the screens. They had reported. They had tried to interpret. And still the bombers came. For civilians in Hamburg, the technical explanation meant little. Whether the radar had been blinded by window, whether the defense had been delayed, whether fighters had chased false echoes, none of that mattered while fire moved through neighborhoods and smoke stole breath in shelters. This is why the story cannot be told as a clean tale of clever invention defeating enemy technology. It is darker than that. Window was brilliant. Window was necessary to the men ordered into the night. Window was part of a campaign that inflicted terrible suffering. The same strip of metal can carry more than one truth. And after Hamburg, everyone understood something had changed. The British had revealed the weapon. The Germans had felt its effect. The air war had entered a new phase. Once the sky had been taught to lie, no radar operator could look at it the same way again. The countermove. Window's first great success did not mean the Germans stopped defending the Reich. War does not pause because one side is surprised. It adapts. German technicians and operators began looking for ways to reduce the confusion. Crews learned. Procedures changed. Controllers adjusted. Night fighter tactics evolved. The defense system did not collapse permanently into helplessness. It absorbed the shock and searched for answers. That, too, belongs in the story. Because the true significance of Window was not that it ended the night air war. Changed the terms. Before Window, much of the struggle had rested on whether bombers could survive a radar-directed defense network. After Window, the contest became more complex. Radar, deception, counter-deception, interpretation, adaptation. The enemy was no longer only an aircraft. It was a signal, a false return, a screen full of clutter, a decision made under uncertainty. This was a new kind of battlefield. The men fighting it did not always have the language for what it would become. Today, people speak of electronic warfare, countermeasures, jamming, spoofing, radar deception. In 1943, it was more immediate. The screen was unreadable. The fighter was in the wrong place. The raid was already overhead. German adaptation could reduce Window's advantage over time, but it could not restore innocence. That was gone. Once operators knew the enemy could manufacture false echoes, every radar return carried a question inside it. Is this real? That question slowed thought. It forced verification. It introduced doubt into a system that had depended on speed. The Germans were not alone in this new world. The British had also feared exactly this. The reason Window had been delayed was the fear that Germany would copy it against British radar. The RAF Museum notes that Window had not been used earlier because of fears the Luftwaffe would replicate it against British radar systems. So the decision over Hamburg was not reckless ignorance. It was a calculated release of a dangerous idea. Once released, it belonged to the war, and the war would use it in every direction it could. The bomber crews still flew. German fighters still rose. Cities still burned. The radar screens still glowed. But beneath all of it, a deeper change had taken place. Technology had promised to reduce uncertainty. Window proved that technology could also multiply it. The Germans had built a system to see through darkness. The British had answered by making darkness crowded with false light. And the legacy of that exchange would reach far beyond Hamburg. The War of Signals. The cheap metal strips falling over Hamburg were part of a larger transformation. World War II is often remembered through visible machines. Tanks, bombers, battleships, submarines, artillery, rifles. Heavy things, loud things, things that crush roads, shake buildings, and leave wreckage behind. But another war was taking shape around them. A war of signals, radar pulses, radio transmissions, navigation beams, jamming, listening, direction finding, deception, codes, countercodes, machines designed to detect other machines, and men trying to decide what the machines were really telling them. Window belonged to that hidden war. Its lesson was simple and severe. Information could be attacked. Not the aircraft, not the radar tower. The meaning, a radar screen was not reality. It was an interpretation of reality. A chain of energy, reflection, display, training, and human judgment. Window entered that chain and corrupted it. The machine did not know it had been deceived. The human being had to discover that under pressure. That idea did not end in 1943. Chaff would become a standard countermeasure. Aircraft would carry more advanced systems. Radar deception would evolve. Electronic warfare would become central to modern combat. The battlefield would grow more crowded with invisible contests. Who sees first? Who hides better? Who jams? Who spoofs? Who believes the wrong signal at the wrong time? But in the Hamburg raids, the future appeared in a crude and physical form. A man with gloves. A bundle in his hand. A chute opening into the night. The strips did not look futuristic. They looked almost pathetic against the scale of the war. Yet they revealed something that commanders, engineers, and crews would never forget. A powerful system can be vulnerable at the point where it trusts itself most. For Germany, that point was radar clarity. For Britain, the decision to use Window came with its own danger. For the crews, the matter was simpler. If the strips gave them a better chance of coming home, they mattered. Not as theory, not as doctrine, as breath, skin, bone, and the possibility of seeing morning. The story of Window is not only about invention. It is about timing, fear, delay, risk, and the strange truth that a weapon does not need to be dramatic to be decisive. Sometimes it only needs to make the enemy hesitate. Sometimes hesitation is enough. And sometimes the smallest objects on the battlefield reveal the largest weakness in a system built by men who believed they had solved the night. Metal snow in the dark. Return to the aircraft over Hamburg. The engines are still beating. The crewman is still near the chute. His hands are cold inside his gloves. The aircraft moves through flak and darkness, through the smell of oil and oxygen rubber, through a sky filled with other bombers he cannot see but knows are there. Somewhere behind them, men in German radar rooms are staring at screens that no longer tell a clean story. He pushes another bundle out. It vanishes instantly. No flash, no explosion, no heroic image, just strips falling into the dark. For the men in the bomber, Window was not an idea anymore. It was a task. Repeat it, time it, trust that somewhere below, the enemy's certainty is breaking. Trust that a cheap strip of metal can buy a few minutes from death. For the German operator, the night has changed. The screen still glows, but the glow no longer means what it meant yesterday. The machine is speaking in echoes, and some of those echoes are lies. For Hamburg, the night is becoming fire. That is the hard truth at the center of the story. The metal strips blinded radar, but they did not make war cleaner. They helped save crews and helped intensify destruction. They were brilliant and terrible in the way many wartime inventions are brilliant and terrible. Not because they contain morality inside themselves, but because human beings decide where and how to use them. They believed radar had made the night visible. But what really happened was that visibility became another battlefield. Germany had trusted a system of screens, towers, controllers, and fighters to impose order on darkness. Britain answered not by smashing the system first, but by poisoning its certainty. A weapon that looked like scraps turned the sky into a false map. And in war, a false map can kill as surely as a bomb. The cheap metal strips did not win the war alone. No honest story should claim that. They did not end the bombing campaign. They did not save every bomber. They did not spare the cities below. But they marked a turning point in how modern war would be fought. From that point forward, seeing was no longer enough. A commander had to ask whether what he saw was true. The final image is not a radar tower or a burning city or a bomber returning at dawn. It is smaller. A strip of metal drifting through cold air. Silent. Almost weightless. And below it, an entire defense system learning too late that even machines can be made to believe a lie. If you are watching from a place touched by these stories, Britain, Germany, America, Canada, Australia, or anywhere families still carry memories of the war, share where you are watching from in the comments. And if someone in your family served, flew, built, repaired, nursed, decoded, or simply endured those years, you are welcome to leave their name there too. For more forgotten stories from World War II, the moments when belief met battlefield reality, subscribe to WW2 Warfront.